welcome to the Golden Hour. I am Golden Duffy, your host. For the next hour, we're going to be talking about something that's super duper important, something that we have not gone to together yet. So I'm really, really excited for this conversation. I'm excited for my incredible guest who's going to offer so much wisdom and information that you need to transform the life story that you are living. So Amber Larkins is a creative visual artist, entrepreneur, published brand photographer, storytelling expert, speaker, coach, and visionary. God, I love the visionaries. Her vision to help purpose-driven humans and brands powerfully extract and communicate their message by tapping into their innate desire to make a difference in the world. Amber's driving passion is to help them capture and present themselves in their true essence through a dynamic visual presence. Amber has successfully founded and grown her own personal brand by working with entrepreneurs, athletes, and athletic brands for over a decade, helping them grow powerful visual presentations. Amber is also the host of Through the Trauma podcast, where she brings on guests who have found success in the face of adversity. These guests include entrepreneurs, athletes, actors, speakers, and coaches, or anyone who has learned to live through the trauma and triumph over it. Amber believes each of us has the power to make a difference in the world around us when we decide to open up our mouths and speak on the issues we want to see changed. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
This is so good. And I actually have not had the conversation of trauma on the TV show yet. So I feel really, really positive that you are the perfect person to have this conversation and for us to offer people just an alternative to dragging the past around with them and identifying with traumas that well, first of all, let me just jump in really quick with the definition of trauma. So we know what we're dealing with and we have kind of a cohesive agreement on what trauma is. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So trauma is the lasting response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing a trauma event can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, and an ability to regulate emotions and navigate relationships. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would definitely say so. There's different definitions people give of trauma and different perceptions people have of it, but I would say that sums it up well.
It's pretty good, right? I thought it was pretty good. Thank you, Google. I thought it was pretty good too. So tell us, like, how did you first get interested even in the subject of trauma? Because it's not something, it's not something that people really want to talk about or explore. I think as we're getting deeper in our spirituality and our awakening, that's when we start to connect with these things. But for the most part in our society, people are really just, medicating, distracting, and ignoring the fact that they have these things going on underneath. So what was the catalyst that got you interested in this?
Yeah, it's funny because I look back over the course of my life and I see things that were pointing me in this direction. But I'll tell you where the pinnacle moment was. I was actually photographing athletes. I was working with a lot of competitors, fitness competitors, and I would spend, hour, 2 hours with these people, and they would open up to me. And I got these stories, these amazing stories of how people had overcome, debilitating diseases or horrifying accidents or, just abuse or alcoholism and all these different things. And they had these stories of how they had used fitness to overcome. And I started to feel the pressure. I feel like I was always a different photographer because I never wanted to exploit anything, or like fitness is like one of those, you have to be careful because you want to show the physique, but I didn't like the over sexualization of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was already kind of different in that regard. And as I would talk to these, mainly women is who I worked with, but I did work with some men too, but it was mainly women, and they would open up to me. And it started bothering me. Like, I'm getting to hear these stories, but they really need to be told. on more of a bigger level.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I do that? And social media is, to me, just doesn't serve the purpose. I mean, it does a good job for what it's for, but it doesn't truly get those stories out there. So I took time and I really started to pray and trying to figure out, like, how can I get these stories told? And it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a long process.
It rarely is, I've seen.
And it was like I got little pieces, little glimpses throughout the years. But I had this idea to photograph these sessions. They were not named at the time, but I thought, what if I could photograph someone's trauma, like the dark kind of, emotion, and then photograph their triumph or like where they are today. So
Wow.
working with athletes, we could do like this conceptual type art photography, and then because I love that's like a creative outlet for me, and then photograph them in their, like, I used fitness to overcome. That's how it started, but then it kind of grew into, as I talked to different people, met different people doing this, and different clients would come to me. They weren't necessarily in fitness, but they had trauma. So we started working with different clients like that. And it's rarely what you think it's going to be.
Totally.
It
Yeah.
was so much more than what I expected, but it's been awesome.
Yeah, it's because we can't have the vision, like we don't even think big enough to get like the full vision at first. And maybe if we did get the full vision, we'd run away. I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
as it starts to unfold, we start to catch up as we up level with the experience, right?
Yeah.
So I love that because you're growing and moving with people, as we coach people, as we listen to their stories, we are doing that growth as well
Mhm.
alongside. I love that. So some of the things I'm sure that you've heard, some really amazing transformations. And I love the idea of photographing that, like taking the before and the after and showing people what is possible, that you don't have to identify with a trauma, you don't have to live with a trauma your whole life, that you can transform it and actually get gifts out of it. So how do we do that? Like, how have you seen people do that? What are some of the takeaways that you've gotten, some of the things that you've recognized and gone, wow, like that's really inspiring and possible? What are some of the
Mm.
things you've seen that are possible from taking that trauma and, extrapolating the gifts?
Yeah, that's a big question, and my mind is going in 50 million directions. But
Share it all. We're here for you.
I will say this: when I first started this, I knew very little about trauma. I just knew what people were sharing with me,
Mm,
and I quickly, at the very first client that I worked with, I was really nervous and scared to even ask her, like, hey,
mm.
let's would you be interested in doing a shoot like this? She was, and she was very grateful, and she had lost a child,
Wow.
which I can't even imagine,
Nope.
but very open about sharing, and later thanked me about giving her these images that she said she never got to have with her daughter. Her daughter was only 13 months old when she passed from
Wow.
cancer. And so I I learned very quickly, okay, how can I help people pull emotion? Because for this first type of session, we have to pull that emotion. How do I help them pull that emotion without pushing too hard?
Mm,
And that was something I had to learn, and I had to read a lot of books, and I had to try to figure out, because I didn't want to do that. There was things that happened through the process of photographing, especially those first several clients, that I wasn't expecting.
mm,
And I never thought this would be, I thought this would just be something like, hey, let me help you share your story.
mhm.
I didn't know there would be an element of healing with
Yes.
that. And what I quickly learned was that, just as some trauma therapy, they'll use art. Some of trauma therapy there is trauma therapy where they actually teach you to go take photographs to kind of
Oh, wow.
express yourself through art.
Mhm.
And this was a different way of helping someone express themselves in a way that they can pull that emotion, they can feel that trauma, they can go back to that place and feel these things, and they're safe to feel it in a safe place and then release it.
Wow.
Another thing that I began to see was when you have images of trauma, and there's all different types, you have images of a trauma that you've undergone or gone through, and this is kind of like who I was. And now I've triumphed over this trauma. Now this is who I am.
Mm.
And when you have those two like polarizing ideas, photographs are a great way to recall memories where you're like, okay, this is who I was, and I'm no longer that person. And now this is who I am, and this is who I identify with.
Yeah.
And there's power in visualization. I mean, we all know this, right?
Yep.
So being able to see yourself and actually see yourself in a powerful state, there's healing that happens in that.
Yeah.
So I tell people when I am very careful to work with people that are on the other side of trauma. I've
Yeah.
had to turn some people away just because I'm not a therapist. I want someone to go get therapy and go get help first and get to a safe place to be able to revisit that trauma before I work with them.
Yep.
But I also want to have resources to send them to. I don't want to just like, no, I'm not, you're not ready.
Yeah.
We send them resources and who to work with. And this is a big reason why I started my podcast, because I wanted to meet other people and I wanted to have a Rolodex of resources to send to people who are hurting.
Love it.
But when you have these two things, it's amazing to see how that identifying back and forth there's power in it. And these were things I didn't know was going to happen when we started this project.
That's amazing. So one of the reasons that just coming to me right now, one of the reasons, so I've been actually studying alchemy. So this is actually alchemy, and a lot of people don't really understand alchemy, but it's really just the transformation of energy. So when you can get people to connect with their transformation and get them to see it visually, it becomes realer, right? Because our mind and our experience is always trying to bring us back to who we were. So when you show someone, it's almost like you take them through another step, another level of identification. So then that past thing, they're like, wow, I really have progressed. Look at how different I look. You actually connect them to that alchemy, and then they're able to live more from that place. So there's so much happening here in the transformation process. It's incredible. One other thing I want to touch on that came up when you were talking is the delicate balance of working with people on trauma and you vetting them to make sure that they're ready for this process. Because the hardest thing about trauma is acknowledging it. It's looking at it. It's feeling the emotions that are connected to it. And this is why a lot of people out there are not healing, because they're not doing the work. They're not looking at the trauma. Because it's so hard. It feels so hard. But the truth is, it's way harder to live with it under the surface than it is to actually acknowledge it, look at it, and let it dissipate. Anytime we look at something like this, fears, anxieties, past experiences that created trauma, we actually dissipate it because we're acknowledging it. So it doesn't have to sit there under the surface trying to get our attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was listening to something recently. It's probably been 2 months ago or whatever, and they gave this amazing analogy. I felt like it was so powerful. But it's like if you have a trash can and you're constantly filling that trash can with trash, but you never take it out. You just keep filling it up, filling it up. And then, what we do as humans, we'll like stuff the trash on down, like pack it on down real tight, and then add more trash. And I feel like this is kind of what trauma is. It's like if you go back to that analogy of the trash can and you think of if that trash is so full, then I try to pull it out. It's the bag rips, it's heavy, it's leaking, it stinks, it makes a mess. this is what happens if we can't deal with our our stuff.
Yeah.
Like we don't want that trash to sit back there and like,
Stink.
boil yeah, in the back of our psyche. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just not good for us
Yeah.
at all. And it's so important on so many levels, whatever that looks like. I'm not saying someone has to do photography to get that out, but find what works
Yeah.
and get it out of there
I
because
love that analogy because it will trash your whole life. It really will. Your life will become trash because you're not like what people don't understand is they think like, okay, I can talk positive, I can have affirmations, I can try to trick my subconscious into believing that I'm abundant or that I'm, love or whatever it is that their worthiness, whatever they're trying to connect with. But if those underlying messages haven't been dealt with, that is actually what we're creating from. So that's why the conversation of trauma and dealing with your trauma is so important, but not just dealing with it, transforming it into the gifts. How do we pull out the best things that could have happened to us? Do you have like any examples you could share or even your own examples of how you were able to turn something traumatic into a gift that actually transformed it?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but let me answer it like this.
All right, let's go.
Um, I I personally had my own trauma, and this is part of my why. I think a lot of people, a part of their why is they go through something. They're like, "Wow." Have you heard this thing of sidetrack for just a moment?
Okay, go ahead.
This thing of the hero and the villain. It's
Yeah.
like both the hero and the villain have pain, but it's how they choose to deal with that pain. So
Mhm.
the hero takes it and says, I don't want other people to feel this, so I'm going to use it as fuel.
Yes.
The villain says, I was hurt, so now I'm going to hurt other people.
Yeah.
This is the difference.
Love it.
And so I think a lot of people you have people that fall into both categories, but then you have a lot of people that fall into that hero category that says, this is my why. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And during the process of doing these sessions and working with different people, I was actually going through a divorce,
Mm.
and very, it was, I was taken by surprise. It was the result of an affair, and there was on his part. And then when I found out, he left. So
Oh.
there was never like an apology or Anyway, so I was very bitter at
Mhm.
first, like I'm just like, I'm one day I'm going to share this story and I'm going to tell everybody what happened. And I was actually meditating one day. This was probably, I don't know, maybe a year, maybe not hardly a year after this had happened. I don't remember time frame, but um I felt so clearly in my heart, I believe it was God said to me, that's not your story.
Mm.
And I went from that moment on, I went on this mission of trying to, one, forgive, and one, be gracious. So there's a lot of power in forgiveness. There's a lot of power in being, gratitude,
Yep.
thankful for the things that you do have.
Mm.
And when I started to transform that way of thinking, um, it revolutionized, it changed everything.
Thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I truly feel like my own experiences has given me more power to work with people and to help people, especially through situations like I've been through. I can relate to that. I
Yeah.
can't relate to some,
Yeah.
but and I see this a lot even on my podcast. I had a guest come on, and she said, I don't really know because there's people that I might hurt if I
Mm.
share certain things. And it's helped me be able to see, like, especially when I think of my ex-husband, I'm not here to make him look bad. I'm here to state the facts. This is what happened,
Right.
but I'm going to turn it quickly back to me. This is how I felt. I
Right.
was hurt. I was bitter. I was angry. I was these things. And this is how I changed myself. Like, he's not here to defend himself. He's not the subject of our conversation. So I feel like when people can do that, there's power in it. And it all comes from that root of being able to forgive, the root of gratitude. Gratitude helps you forgive, I
Yes.
think.
I love gratitude is one of my favorite things, and I've been promoting it a lot lately because I believe that it is the transforming power of gratitude that makes our life different, that helps us to heal. And when it comes to something like, you know, a divorce or an end in a relationship or, thinking you're going to hurt someone, if we're not in blame, if, like you said, if we're in forgiveness and we're in gratitude for the experience and all that it's taught us and all the wisdom that it's given us so that we can share with other people, that you're not going to be spreading that yucky energy around the world. You're not going to be hurting people because you're literally, you're standing in your truth and in your power. And when we're doing that, we don't feel guilt, we don't feel shame, we don't throw blame. We actually stand in our power and we create a different story that doesn't hurt people. It empowers us to be in a situation where we can share things that were helpful to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and being able to just being able to empathize. And I know, like we talked before, and we're both empaths, but being able to look at someone, it changes the perspective of how you see that person. So when I can look at, and I'll just use my ex-husband as an example, but when I can look at him and say, these are the things that he dealt with as a child. These are the things. We're two imperfect people trying to make a marriage work, and unfortunately ours failed. But there's when I can look at things and almost like empathize with where he's come from, it helps me be able to say, it's not personal. Maybe it is personal, but I
It
can.
doesn't have to be personal,
It
right?
doesn't
It
have to be.
doesn't have
That's
to
right.
be like, I'm not good enough and that's why he cheated on me. That doesn't have to be the story. The story can transform into, this man has his own issues, his own wounds, and he's dealing with it in his own way. But what can I learn from this? How can I grow from this? Where I don't actually go into more of a self-critical nature about myself, but I actually up level and I take the up level.
Yes, and that's where the power is. You can tap into that. You've tapped into some power.
Yes, I love that so much. And speaking of power, I've really and I want to just come back to the empath thing, but I've recently started taking photos with my daughter, and I would say over the course of my life, I wasn't a big like photo taker. Like I have a lot of photos of my kids. And of course, with social media and the way things have gone, and I have a business now, but taking photos with my daughter and even a company I was working with for a little while, I just noticed how much more confidence I feel and how much more comfortable I am in front of the camera because I've allowed myself to do that. I've allowed myself to be seen. There's such a fear of being seen with people, especially with such a strong message. I think it's amazing that you are getting people to actually want to do this and creating that healing story throughout it. I think that is really incredible.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
so
I've worked with some that I do know they're holding back,
yeah,
like they're not fully releasing it, but everything in their own time.
yeah,
And I understand that. And I tell them up front, I'm not here to push you to do something you're uncomfortable with, but I want you to release as much as you feel comfortable with. And, you
yeah.
know, we,
It's
we do
not
that
easy.
on, we do it on levels,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. It's not easy. I've noticed
Mhm.
anytime I'm like taking photos and I'm like judging myself, that's when I have trouble letting go. And I'm lucky to have my daughter who actually just can make me very comfortable. But the more you can kind of release your need to be perfect, or, I think that's probably the basis at the fear of being seen for people is they're worried they're going to be wrong. They're worried they're going to look stupid. And, these are all, I believe they're all like playground wounds, I call them, or
Mhm.
like elementary school wounds when we got outed or we had the wrong answer or we got embarrassed in school. So again, trauma and helping yourself to heal from those traumas will help you to get out into the world more, to be seen more so that
Mhm.
you can actually make a difference.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too that I've been thinking and meditating on this a lot recently, but this idea of needing permission to do something, like I'm working with a business coach, and he recently, it's almost as if he give me permission to do a certain thing, and my creativity just exploded, and I'm like, where did that come from?
Wow.
Like, I have to have permission. And then there's this idea of feeling like we have to be validated.
Mm-hmm.
And there's real power that can be achieved when you realize that I can validate myself. Like everything that I need is right inside of me, and I can give myself permission. I can give myself validation. And there's a crazy thing that happens. And I'm curious if you've seen this, but this crazy thing that happens where you will think like what I'm saying is ridiculous, like nobody's going to resonate. It's going to make me sound stupid. And those will be the things that people are like, oh my God, that was so impactful.
Yeah.
Have you found that?
Yeah. And it's usually when we're being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people also need that permission to be vulnerable and to be, to show up in a different way. And we're doing that all the time. So I'm curious about the business coach because permission, I like the idea of like permission slips because we tend to limit ourselves, and we limit ourselves based on the beliefs that we grew up with, right? Like you're good at this, you're not good at that. I know a woman right now who like up until like a year ago, she didn't think she was an artist, and now she's creating the most incredible art I've ever seen. So it's getting rid of those limitations. And do we need another person to help us through that? Or can we do it on our own?
I mean, I think there's many different ways that we can get to the end goal, but I'm a firm believer in coaching, and I'm a firm believer in I laugh and I tell people if I could afford it, I would have a coach in every single area of my life: financial coach, fitness coach,
Yes,
business coach,
yes, yeah.
everything,
Accountability is something, right?
everything, man.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Because there is, even when you read, like, I don't know how many of your people read scripture, but when you read scripture and there's like this, where two or more are gathered, where we're a three chord strand,
Yep.
there's power that happens when we're able to, it's like, this is where masterminding comes from.
Yep.
Because when I can come up with my own ideas, but when I'm talking to you, we're bouncing ideas.
Yes.
And then we add a third person or a fourth person, and we're bouncing more ideas.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful,
Yeah.
and that's why we need fellowship, and that's why we need other people.
Yeah.
But I'm a firm believer in coaching and accountability and having someone help us, because sometimes we can't see those things, and it takes one comment or one thing for us to change the trajectory of what we're doing.
It's so true. And we're so often so close to our stuff that we can't see like our blind spots. So it's always good to have someone with a different perspective and different ideas. I mean, if you think about it, like in the level of channeling, right? So we're bringing in wisdom, right? We're allowing information to be downloaded to us. If you have more than one person, the channel is bigger, right? It becomes like a cylinder. So the ideas are going to start flying. Not to mention, connection is so important. And this is one thing that I feel got a little bit lost in our world in the last couple of years, because we've got this virtual connection, which is a false sense of connection. There's connection, but it's not the same as being one in person with one another, right? If you think about the connection piece of it and the community piece of it, right? The excitement that we get from working with one another, we keep bringing each other's energies up by having passion, by having excitement, by being like, oh my goodness, right? And resonating with one another. So that energetically, that is one of the smartest things we can do. And that's where our world needs to come to. We need to come together more. We need to collaborate more. And we need to stop having, I remember I went to a seminar and they were talking about Darwinism and how it was survival of the fittest, right? And how that was where the world went wrong, because that's where competition came in play. And we need to get rid of that philosophy in order to create a world that is more cohesive and more connected collectively, so that we can create the love and the kindness and the compassion that we need to create a better world, and not separation, which is what's been going on.
That's interesting. I've
Say
never heard that before, but that's very interesting. However, I greatly agree with the fact that energy, I after my divorce, I went on this this like journey to figure out energy because I found great healing in an energy healer. And I there there's this thing, and I think about it like this. I come out of the fitness industry. I work with a lot of athletes. We photograph in gyms. There is, you can think of it like this. This is how I think of it. When I go into the gym to work out, I have a whole lot more energy and I want to do a whole lot more. Why?
Yes.
Because there's a vibe in that gym.
Yes.
It's different than if I sit at home, try to do, I've got to work a whole
So
lot more
true.
mentally to
So
get
true.
to that same level.
Yep.
So to say that there's no energy is, it's crazy to me. Like we do bounce off of each other.
Yeah.
And even the fact that you and I are not in the same location, in fact, we're on different sides
Yeah.
of the country, right? But still, that it's amazing to me that still you and I can bounce those ideas just from being together. I do think there's something more powerful being in person.
Yeah.
But I
But
mean, we
thank
do,
goodness we can do this, right? Thank goodness we
right.
can be in the virtual world together and see what comes up. And I love the fact that you just brought the gym thing up with the energy, because that's, that's where we get more life force, is when we're in relationship with people and we're recognizing that, people have vibes, right? People have
Mhm.
vibes. And when we feel really good around people, we know that they're in a higher vibration. When we feel low, when we allow someone's, because you don't have to allow this, but when we allow someone's bad mood or bad attitude to bring us down, that's when we're allowing energy around us to infiltrate. And that's where I wanted to just connect on the empath thing. Really quick, Facebook at Amber Larkins. That's where you can find her on Facebook. I'm going to share a couple more ways you can connect with Amber, because you definitely want to connect with her. So when it comes to empaths, right? One of the things that, and I am an empath and I do feel energy. However, I do love to be able to be, I think there's this idea. This has been a download recently. I went to a concert and did not love the vibes there at certain parts of the concert. In fact, I left early because the music was too intense. There was some moshing going on, and it was a reggae concert. And I was like, I'm out of here, right? So one thing that I realized was it's not our job as spiritual beings, as human beings, to avoid all the darker energies or the lower energies. It's our job to navigate them and to bring ourselves up consistently so that we actually nullify those negative energies. So I think in the spiritual world, I have got a couple people in my life who are like, oh, I don't go there. And oh, that's bad energy. And this, and I'm like, you can't protect yourself enough. It's everywhere. So what you need to do is figure out how to navigate it. You got cranky people in your house. You need to navigate those situations so they're not constantly pulling you down. And the way to do that, you said it before, was meditate, have a foundation of peace, have some sayings in your head that you can go to, like, I am love and light. We have a saying in our house: every time someone leaves the house, we say, shine your beautiful light. And that reminds them that they have this light to share with the world, instead of being all in our head and, in a bad mood and mad at somebody, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think there's something with, you're right. We have to learn how to navigate certain people, certain types of, and that's unavoidable. Like, if we work with someone that has bad energy, we have to be the light there.
If you have teenagers in your house, for good Lord.
Mine's not,
Yeah.
mine's preteens, but
Toddlers, yeah, anything like.
but just as bad, I feel like, almost.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, but then there is too, like, that idea of being able to choose to, like, if something is, if I'm in a situation that I can't control my energy, it is my responsibility to kind of back away from that, or to figure out how to navigate through it. But because I do believe that people's energy can rub off on you. And it's funny, but I'll go back to this idea of the gym, right?
yeah,
You have certain gyms that are kind of more foo-foo, we'll call it.
yeah,
That's, people don't really get stuff done. They just kind of go in there and socialize. And
yeah,
yeah, maybe it's kind of like attached to a spa and they have fun and they eat donuts and things.
yeah.
But then you have the hardcore gyms that are like bodybuilders and people that's like serious. It's a different energy.
Totally.
So, what you want out of your life, you do have to be intentional to some regard to be in the presence of those people because their energy does rub off on you.
Yes, completely. And in good ways, hopefully in good ways, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. All right, I'm going to share your website, transformationthroughtraumaproject.com. So you can find Amber through that. She's got some other really good stuff coming up, and we're going to share that in our show notes when the show airs. And then your Instagram, let me just keep that up for a second. So let's just talk about, so one thing I wanted to share about being empathic is what I've found with people who are empathic. And I want to talk about the idea of protection, right? Like what we're doing to protect ourselves, especially if you're in an industry like you are, where you are taking on people's stories, you are hearing about people's traumas. And knowing that being an empath, I've seen a lot of people disempower themselves with the energy of being an empath. Oh, I'm an empath and I feel everything and I can't help it. And it's very disempowering. If you could take yourself and say, I am an empath, however, I am so powerful that I can protect myself from the energies and I don't need to take it with me. In fact, my husband said that about the concert. He said, I'm really good at just protecting myself. And I said, yeah, I'm good at protecting myself. But when I have that fight or flight feeling, I got to go. And that's part of me protecting myself, is not subjecting myself to energies around me that don't feel safe to me. So, as empaths, I think that we are some of the most intuitive beings here, and we're also the most helpful, but we can be a big disservice to ourselves and others if we're allowing them to constantly infiltrate in negative ways.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, so like, I'll tell you, when my husband, there was some narcissistic
Hmm.
characteristics in our marriage. And when we finally got divorced, I was having a conversation with God and I said, why did you make me an empath? Like, made me a perfect
Perfect.
trigger person
Exactly. Yeah.
for this person. And why? And now it's created all this hurt. And, you get mad at God and you
Yeah.
don't curse him, but you do sometimes.
Yeah.
And it was like it came to me immediately.
Mm.
It was like, your being an empath is not a curse. That's a gift. That is a gift I've given you. But yes, like any other gift, it can be used wrong,
Yeah.
and you've not been using it to its ability. You've got to fine tune it. You've got to learn how to create boundaries around it. You've got to
Yes.
learn how to navigate through that. But it can be a really beautiful gift, and everybody has those things, whether they're an empath or not. You have those specific things in your life that is they're your superpowers. That's what makes you a superpower.
Yes.
And it's like, when we can use those things and really tailor fit them to for good, it's there's it's like, that's where we find our destiny. That's where we find our purpose. That's where we can say, okay, like, I have to use this for good, but I do have to create boundaries around it. I have to protect it. And it that takes a little bit of time to figure that out, I think.
I think you said the magic word, boundaries, for sure. Like
Mhm.
once we have boundaries in place, then people, they're not able to access. That's what boundaries are all about, having boundaries so people don't have this access to you that changes your energy field. I love that.
Right.
Yeah. So we're talking about like the gifts, like our own gifts, how we experience and perceive, right? Let's talk about a little bit about what you're getting into now, which is the storytelling. Once we perceive something we've been through that has been traumatic, once we perceive it and we start to look for what good came out of this, that's when we really transform it. That's when we heal. That's when we grow. And that's when we're able to offer it back. I always say, our trauma, once we heal it, is like a giant spotlight that we send back to those who are coming through. And as we help people,
Mhm.
which I think is one of the purposes of our traumas, is to help those coming through. as we help, we heal even further and we help them heal. So that's like amazing.
Oh, you're spot on. And I love the idea of the spotlight. Like that's perfectly described. I love it. It's so
Amazing.
good.
So what would you say when you're working and seeing people, what is the secret sauce? Is it the gratitude? Is it the looking? Is it the asking? Is it the disconnect? Like you're showing people this progress, which is so amazing. Like as you see those aha moments, are the gifts something that, people have to, I mean, you have to let go of the past to create, right? To create the present and the future.
Mhm.
So, like,
Well,
have you seen that process? Can you share a little bit about
mhm.
how our audience, like some advice that we can give them in coming
Yes.
through for the healing process?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
think I think you said it right. There's a process. So the very first thing is being aware. Like, you know, triggers can come up out of anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah. And you're like, I mean,
Driving, for crying out loud.
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Total stranger.
I look at my divorce. We'll use that as an example.
Yes.
And I'm like, I'm fully over this. We co-parent really well. We get along fine. Like, I'm over this. And then all of a sudden, I'll the other day, my son and I were going back and forth, and
Yep.
as I felt triggered, but I was aware and I was able to catch it. And I'm like, now, did I handle it exactly right? I mean, I'm human,
You did the best you could. That's what I say.
right? But I was triggered, and when I'm going back and forth with him, I'm thinking it triggered me because this is the same type of argument I would have with my
Same
ex.
feelings, right? Same feelings are coming up.
Yes.
Yep.
So that there is, I think the first step is truly just being aware. Like I, and having that awareness, being able to catch it when it pops up. Because if we can't think through what's happened, like if we can't say, because I leave that situation with my son and I start to think, what was that triggered me? What
Mhm.
was why did I react the way that, why did I yell at him? Like when I can ask those questions, but I can't ask those questions if I'm not even aware of
No,
it,
no,
right? So
no.
the first step I think is truly being aware and starting to think through things and analyze why I feel a certain way. And why is a powerful question, a very empowering question.
Mhm.
Okay, I feel this way. Why? Why do I feel that? Why do I feel that? Ask it about 5 times or 10 or keep
Yep.
digging till you get to the crux of the matter, which is, I feel this way because um, when I was young, I never felt validated or whatever,
Yep. Yep.
That's how you get to the bottom.
Yes.
And it's like digging. You got
Yeah.
to dig through and there's layers and you might not get to that bottom layer, but it may take time, it may take therapy, it may take different modalities, whatever, but it's layers. It's working through those layers.
Yeah. And I will say, there is a layering process, and I love what you shared. My question is always, where does this come from? Because that will usually help me to get like to the deeper root of stuff. But first of all, I would just say the arguments that we have like that are invitations to heal. So when we have a trauma, we will often, almost always, get invitations in our life to heal. So if you have a relationship that mirrors the one that you had before, that's your call. Like that's your call to go, okay, where is my stuff in this and how do I release it and heal from it so I don't keep creating it?
Mm.
And then the other piece of that is, because emotions are addictive, we can do the healing process and still be reactive like that because we're addicted to the hormones and the adrenaline and the purpose of it, right? Like if we're fighting with somebody, we feel like we matter. If we're fighting with somebody, we feel like we have a voice, right? Which
Mm.
actually we really don't.
Mhm.
Because in moments like that, when you are in high emotion, logic is lost. We always say it's not a teaching moment when we're having those triggers. So if you can do exactly what you did and walk away and process, right? Because awareness isn't quite enough. I remember like being above myself and still yelling at my kids and going, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. But I couldn't stop this. Right. So it's that process of healing and getting to the bottom of it that will create enough space the next time to go, okay, how do I want to respond to this? Instead of
Mm.
mad, how do I really want to respond to this? Because, this little boy is just doing what he's doing, and he's activating something in me that I have the ability to do something about.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
So
No, that's awesome. I mean, that's amazing because that's like again, it goes back to that process. Like once you're aware of it, then the healing process begins at that point.
yeah, yeah. That's like only really scratching the surface, because that awareness piece is great, but there's almost like an imprint within us that needs to be erased.
Mm,
Like we have this blueprint of this experience, like this, really traumatic thing that you went through, by the way, like, divorce, cheating, abandonment, rejection, all that stuff is in that
mhm.
little imprint. And it's like, well, how do I begin to erase that imprint by healing, by releasing, by no longer believing any of that? But
Mhm.
and you did it. You transformed the story because you said, you kind of went on the outside of it and said, let me look at this from a higher perspective of what this person may have been going through, and not necessarily, I've got my stuff in this, but it's not directed at me to hurt me. It's actually brought here to expand and grow me.
Yeah. And this is what I tell people too, that this idea of storytelling, that there's really three different stories that we're telling ourselves. Like
Yep.
we're telling ourselves the story of the past. What happened? We're telling ourselves a story every day in the present. How do we perceive things? And then we're telling ourselves the story of the future. And the beauty of it all is that we get to choose these things. So it's like, again, that going back to which we talked earlier about the talking about the story of the past, like this is the facts and this is how I feel about the facts and this is my healing process through that. But then being able to choose in the present, in the future, we get to choose how we perceive things. We get to choose how the story we're going to write for the future.
Yes.
And that's really I feel like the beauty of storytelling. You just hit all over that. So I meant to say that earlier, and I was like, I lost my train of thought. We got into something else.
Yes, no, I definitely want to hear a little bit more about storytelling, because, the story is the experience, right? And how we perceive it is how the story plays out. And how we respond now is how the story continues to play out. So we have control over so much of it that we don't even realize. And I think when you transform, the trauma into a different story, into a different meaning, into, what did I get from this?
Mm,
What are the who am I because of this, right? Looking at your
yes.
power, like how powerful you are, how strong you are, that you overcame this. You're way more powerful than you were before that, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
I
talk a little bit about storytelling.
Well, I want to say this. I had a mentor, and I used to photograph. I still do occasionally. Will photograph retreats, and so I get invited to some of these amazing retreats. And
Cool.
I,
That's great.
uh, she took us through this activity, or took the people on the retreat. I was the photographer, but I get to embark on this. But um, through this idea of like, write down who hurt you, like the three people that hurt you the most, and you write them down. And then it's like, okay, now write down all the horrible things they did to you. You write all that down. Now write down where you wouldn't be, where you would not be in these places if it had not been for those three
Oh,
people.
that's cool.
And it's funny because it starts to transform exactly what you're saying. You start to see things differently. And I can honestly look back on my own situation and I can say, I would not be doing what I'm doing right now if
Right.
I was if this had not happened to me. I would not be the person I am. I lived under the vice of fear for so long. And it wasn't until my back was against the wall and I become a single mom having to all of a sudden take care of 2 kids and myself, and it was like now it's pushed my back against the wall and it's forced me to rise up. And
Yeah.
there's I wouldn't have done that had it not
No,
been. And
no.
there's a level.
Be comfortable. It's comfortable being comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And there's a level of forgiveness that happens when you start to perceive things in that way.
Yeah, I agree.
So it does go back to the question you asked me, which is storytelling and the story that we're telling ourselves. And we have to change the narrative.
Yes.
And so what I'm doing is helping people share their story. But what I really get to do behind the scenes is help them change their narrative
Yes.
and challenge them to see things from a different perspective, which is honestly like I love that part of it.
I love it too. All right, so we got a couple more minutes left. Just share what you're doing for people, what you're bringing to the world, and what your new offers are going to be, just so people have an idea of what they can come to you for.
Yeah.
I'll put your
Yeah.
website.
So yeah, everything really revolves around the Transformation Through Trauma project. I am creating a new. It's similar to the Transformation Through Trauma project. There's a lot of the same elements in it, but it's working with brands because I've worked with athletes and I've worked with brands and mainly fitness brands, but also other brands as well. But this will be specifically for sharing stories within your brand and being able to pick out those impactful stories, those epiphany moment stories.
Mm.
And so some of those won't be personal, some of them will. We work with different entrepreneurs to figure out like what their story is, what their purpose is, get really clear on what that looks like, and then create content around it. And sharing this in a visual format with that kind of content is, I feel like it's powerful. I believe that athletes and entrepreneurs, they have the same type of mindset, this relentlessness, this push, this drive. And to me, it's like if we can tap into that, that's who's going to initiate, to me,
Mhm.
changing the world. And entrepreneurs can have the power to do that. They just need to know exactly where they're going, and some do. And but for the ones that don't, but they have a desire to change the world, they have these powerful stories, they have this powerful why. Let's get that brand out there in front of people.
I love that. There's so much power and intention behind that. I think I shared a little bit with you. I've been flying by the seat of my pants for a long time. And if I had maybe had a cohesive idea in the beginning, um, you know, I think it would be a stronger message would have come through sooner. But because we're in this like process, we're always in this process of like healing ourselves and figuring out who we are. So to have a guide, like to have a coach, to have somebody with your expertise to clarify the vision and set the intentions, I feel like that is so powerful. So I'm excited for people to work with you and connect with you and to hear the incredible transformation stories that come from it.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm excited. It's a lot of work, but it's so rewarding.
It is. And they say, when you're doing what you love and you feel passionate about it, it doesn't really feel like work. It feels
Mm-mm.
more just like kind of the next step, right? The next step to our expansion and growth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Amber. You can connect with Amber on Facebook at Amber Larkins. You can connect with her on Instagram at Empowerography Files and get to see her amazing pictures. And her content is it's really deep and transformative. I will definitely say that. And then here's her website one more time. Definitely connect with Amber. Amber, thank you so much for your time, for being here today, for all that you're doing to transform our world, because this is big stuff. Like this is not easy stuff. It's really, it'd be a lot easier to just take photos and not even, family photos, whatever, and not think about it. But to get into the nitty-gritty with people, I have to really applaud you.
Well, thank you so much. That means so much to me. It really does.
That's awesome. All right, hang out for a second. I'm just going to close the show. All right, everybody, this is our show for today. Thank you all for being with us. Love you all. Got to find my thing here. Peace out.